Good afternoon, folks. This is John Rust on the Radio, The John Rust Show, broadcasting in central Indiana on Freedom 95, 950 AM and 95.9 FM, all across central Indiana, and broadcast also all over the world on freedom95.us. And I'm told we have a good listener from Virginia, Jim Banks, who purports to represent our beautiful Hoosier state, who lives in Virginia in $1 million home. Apparently, he is one of our number one fans listening. So welcome to the show, Jim.
Big thanks to all the folks of the Commonwealth of Virginia.
So, folks, when I announced the show and started doing it, it was to raise the curtain and shine the flashlight. Little did I know that now we have a lot of elected Indiana politicians repeating verbatim what gets said on this show. So we are having an effect, and that's wonderful. So when you listen to this show, you're going to hear what our Secretary of State's going to be saying, what our Lieutenant Governor will be saying. And our other Senator, Todd Young, who picked up our line that Indiana is a red state. We're a conservative state. We need deep red conservative representatives, not career politicians. Unfortunately, with the voting record of Todd Young and Jim Banks and every one of our members of the GOP delegation, it's just not the case. But things are coming to a boil on this. Specifically, we all know what's going on in Iran, and what Donald Trump had some very harsh words just a few days ago. He said, they don't know what the F they're doing. He was referring to Israel and Iran. But I think really behind the scenes, he's really upset with what the Republicans in the U.S. Senate are doing. I think it's under his nerves. You have to remember, he called for, this is from his own words, I cannot believe the Republicans are extending the debt ceiling. I am a Republican. I am embarrassed. Also from Donald J. Trump. No member of Congress should be eligible for re-election if our country's budget is not balanced, deficits not allowed. That says it all right there. Instead, we get these senators that are for sale. They're bought and paid for by BlackRock.
Yes.
There was an article in the Babylon Bee, which is a very humorous online.
Basically the modern version of what the Onion once was.
Yes. And it says, congressmen to wear barcodes so lobbyists can self-check out.
That sounds pretty accurate.
So when you think of Jim Banks and Todd Young and our entire Indiana GOP delegation, just imagine them with a big barcode on their back, because they are being bought and paid for. If you take a donation from BlackRock, you're bought and paid for.
Yeah.
Period. If you vote for any bill that increases the debt ceiling and throws more debt onto our children's future, you are doing the absolute wrong thing. You are not a conservative. You should not be in the Republican Party, in my opinion, if you vote for massive new government debt. And that's what they're all doing. Every single member of the Indiana GOP delegation voted in early June. Was it in early June?
It was around that time, yes.
For the CR that is increasing the debt ceiling in the congressional version by $4 trillion. And Jim Banks and Todd Young are saying, hold my beer. They're going to do it by $5 trillion of new debt. And, I've said this repeatedly, but it is worth repeating. Your share, you the listener, as a taxpayer of our nation's debt when Jim Banks and Todd Young went into Congress in 2017, when they were sworn in, was $170,000 per taxpayer. Today, that is over $323,000. And with what this latest CR is doing, Thomas Massey projects the math on that one to be over $500,000. In perspective, a typical Hoosier taxpayer through their life pays in over $500,000 in federal taxes. Jim Banks and Todd Young are doubling that. That is the largest tax increase in history. They say this is a tax cut. It's baloney. When you increase the debt, that debt has to be paid, pure and simple. So, folks, that's why we're doing this show. Hopefully, maybe we can get Todd Young and Jim Banks to actually grow a pair and come out to be actual conservatives and vote against this awful, big boondoggle that is coming up before the Senate, perhaps this week or next week.
Yeah.
No. Vote no on it. Strip the raising the debt ceiling from it, come through with a balanced budget. Donald J. Trump earlier this year said, submit a balanced budget. It can be done. Do you remember that?
Yes.
This year.
Yeah. He called for it.
But Jim Banks and Todd Young are saying, no, we like government debt. So hopefully, maybe one of them will, or both of them will vote against it. There's always hope.
There is.
And if they're true conservatives, they would absolutely vote against it.
Absolutely.
Rand Paul has announced
Rand
he's
Paul.
voting against it.
And
Thomas Massey's voting against it, or has voted against it.
Warren Davidson voted against
Warren
it.
Davidson
Yes.
voted against it. So there are a few true conservatives in Washington. But unfortunately, we just get all these fake conservatives.
And which is unfortunate. But yeah, I mean, it's always, I would love for them, if they would like to, if they do vote for it, I'd love for them to come back and, especially if Banks votes for it, I'd love for him to come back and say, I'll ask him, what good do you think comes out of raising the national debt and giving our children and grandchildren more debt that they're going to have to pay for?
Absolutely. Well, we're going to be at 25% of all revenue coming into the federal government just in paying the interest on the debt that's being accrued. And unfortunately, with what this big, awful bill, the boondoggle bill, that Banks is, I think, pushing it. I think he will vote for it. I hope Todd Young votes against it. I hope Jim Banks votes against it. I hope he comes out as a true conservative.
If he does, I will. If he does, good. They do, good on them.
No, I will call balls and strikes fairly, and call Todd Young's office, call Jim Banks' office, and say, hey, we are a red state. We are Hoosiers. We are sick of all this government debt. Vote no on that awful bill.
And I would just add, too,
and pass the tax cuts that are keeping the present tax rates in structure that we have today.
Right.
Pass that as a separate standalone bill.
Yeah.
And then come back and let's get all of the DOGE cuts codified into federal law. They have not done one. The minuscule $9 billion, which was 0.018% of all of the savings that Elon Musk's team identified, that bill's been shelved by the U.S. Senate. You're not hearing a word about it.
No.
We have to at least, do that. That's the bare minimum. And Elon Musk found over $500 billion, with a B, billion dollars in spending just in 3 months, easily identifiable. I think he was on track to save over $2 trillion, with a T, trillion dollars in government savings this year had he been given carte blanche to find whatever government waste, fraud, and abuse was out there. And Elon Musk would have found it.
Yeah.
But he got shoved aside by the establishment in D.C., by BlackRock, who is funding all these politicians who don't want to really shake up the boat and actually change things in Washington. Career politicians only care about their careers, not about true fiscal responsibility. When I ran for the Senate, one of the things I wanted to do was bring fiscal conservatism back to Indiana politics, because it's gone from the Indiana Republican Party today. Look what's happening, and we'll talk about that in the next segment on tolls. But I mean, the Indiana Republican Party has warped into this massive party of government spending, of a massive gasoline tax. We pay the 4th highest gasoline tax in the country. And now they just got approved, unfortunately, permission for Governor Braun to put tolls on every single mile of interstate in the state of Indiana. We're Republicans. We should be about cutting government spending, not looking for ways to increase government spending. Instead, just look at what's happening in Washington. This is from Chip Roy. He says, the rumor is the Senate plans to jam the House with its weaker, unacceptable law before July 4th. This is not a surprise, but it would be a mistake. The bill in its current Senate form would increase deficits, continue most green new scam subsidies, and otherwise fail even the basic smell test. I would not vote for it as it is. That's from Chip Roy.
Yes.
No, you shouldn't vote for it. Jim Banks, no, vote no. Todd Young, vote no. You pretend to be conservative when you go to Lincoln Day dinners in Indiana.
Have the courage to vote no.
But actually vote conservative for once in D.C. It's pretty simple. But, we will see who is a true conservative on this. You cannot be a conservative, folks. You cannot be a conservative if you vote for new, massive government debt.
Voting no, even if it passes, makes all the difference in the world. Because if you vote no, what you're saying to the people who put you there in the first place is, I am on your side. I hate the massive spending. I hate the debt. I stand with Thomas Massey. I stand with Rand Paul, and I stand with you. Because we should not be piling on debt onto future generations. Voting no makes that difference. And
Correct.
If you don't vote no, what you're saying is, I agree with Chuck Schumer, with John Thune,
AOC.
and with AOC.
Yeah, absolutely. Folks, when we come back, we'll get right back into this, including what Donald J. Trump has to say about the Green New Deal scam tax credits in this bill. This is John Rest on Rest on the Radio on Freedom 95. Welcome back, folks. This is John Rust on Rust on the Radio, Freedom 95, broadcasting on 950 AM and 95.9 FM all across central Indiana and on freedom95.us all across the world. So in the earlier segment, we were talking about this big, awful boondoggle that is coming up before the Senate very soon. Donald Trump has fortunately come out and said, wait, stop. This is a direct quote from Donald J. Trump. I hate, quote, green tax credits, unquote, in the great, big, beautiful bill. They are largely a giant scam. I would much prefer that this money be used somewhere else, including reductions. Anywhere would be preferable. Windmills and the rest of this junk, quote unquote junk, are the most expensive and inefficient energy in the world. It is destroying the beauty of the environment, and it is 10 times more costly than any other energy. None of it works without massive government subsidy. Energy should not need a subsidy. Also, it is almost exclusively made in China. It is time to break away, finally, from this craziness.
Yeah.
Amen.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Boom.
It was well said.
And you know what, folks? The Senate bill takes the House bill, which was bad, and makes it even worse. The House bill was phasing out all this green crap by 2028.
It should have been phased out immediately.
It should have been immediately. And the Senate bill, if you actually read the fine print on it, it doesn't phase out until 2040.
And that's...
I'll be 37 by the time that happens.
This is just Congress not kicking the can down the road. They are kicking your kids in the head.
Yeah, which is worse.
Which is worse, because they are making your energy costs and your kids' energy costs much higher in the future. This is a direct quote from Alex Epstein. The House terminated subsidies for new solar wind projects during the Trump administration using strong 2028 placed in service deadline. It should have been today, but that's better than nothing.
Yeah.
The Senate proposal switched to a fake 2027 construction begins deadline, which gives 4 bonus years to place in service. So really 2031. And that's if you read that version of the law. But I've read other versions that if you actually look at it technically, it's over in 2040. Extending solar and wind subsidies through 2031 guarantees that we would have a lot more new subsidized and unreliable solar and wind ruining our grid.
Yeah.
The time is now to terminate. That's from Alex Epstein. But why are Republicans funding this? Trump is making it happen by saying no, and he's putting his money where his mouth is. The Environmental Protection Agency has announced an energy reorganization plan that will eliminate its Energy Star offices. And what they're talking about there, folks, is if you go into Home Depot or Lowe's or any store, you'll see appliances that have this big Energy Star on them, and you think, oh, that's going to be great. That's going to save me a lot of cost.
No.
It's not.
It absolutely does not save you anything.
I also would point out that computers in the 1990s had to have those stickers on them, too. I think that was during the Clinton administration.
It was.
Well, the problem with all that Energy Star stuff is it may use less water and less energy for one cycle, But a lot of times, if you use a dishwasher that's Energy Star related, you got to run it through 3 times sometimes.
Yeah.
So you're using almost 3 times the energy that a regular appliance that would just, let it use the prescribed amount of energy needed to clean the appliances. Energy is abundant. We have so much coal in the state of Indiana. Why on earth are we trying to close coal-powered plants in Indiana and make our energy more expensive?
And I would also point out that, I think that most of them are going with that green scam, particularly what I call the bird killers, the windmills.
Yeah. And the windmills, and the windmills. If it's like the solar panels. If you even get wind in the solar panels, if you even get sun.
And
Hail
listen to what,
damage, too.
yeah, Lindsey Grahamnesty. That's Rush Limbaugh. My gosh, I miss Rush so much.
I miss him too. It's not the same without him.
Yep, absolutely. So this is from Steve Malloy. Rhino senators try to resurrect the climate hoax. It looks like Lindsey Grahamnesty and Bill Cassidy are trying to stick a border carbon tax in the big, beautiful bill. It's called the Foreign Pollution Fee Act, which is currently going through budget reconciliation, was introduced by Republican Senators Bill Cassidy and Lindsey Grahamnesty, and it would impose a tariff based on how much carbon dioxide the exporter has emitted. Markets such as Britain and the European Union, which are similar in carbon intensity to the U.S., would be exempt, while heavy polluters such as China would pay more. Although structured differently, the bill would function like the EU's Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, a climate-focused trade measure that aims to raise revenue and support domestic industry. Folks, it's the same with tariffs. If you raise that, you're going to have a higher cost for your goods.
Yeah.
China has lower energy costs because they are still building coal-powered plants, 2 new coal-powered plants every week. What is Indiana doing? We are trying to close ours down. I believe Braun has announced that they're going to try to have one of the plants continue in operation for a while, but that plant should be rebuilt in place because that's exactly what's happening in Canada. Listen to this, folks. This is breaking news. Saskatchewan to rebuild its coal fleet, talking about their coal-powered plants that power all of Alberta. Listen to this. Federal regulations calling for its demist are going to be basically ignored. Saskatchewan's coal industry receives a stay of execution. This is from Canada. For years, the conventional coal-fired power industry in Saskatchewan has been living under the death sentence, one to be carried out in 4 years, 6 months, and 12 days from now. Federal regulations proclaim the end of coal-fired power generation in Canada by 2030 as a way of reducing Canada's greenhouse gas emissions to combat quote-unquote climate change. On Wednesday, June 18th, the government of Saskatchewan issued a stay of execution, as it were. On that day, the Minister of Crown Investments Corporation Minister and Minister responsible for Sask Power, Jeremy Harrison, sent a letter to Sask Power workers informing them that instead of shutting down its coal fleet, Sask Power would be rebuilding it. That's exactly what we should be doing in the state of Indiana.
Excellent, and especially in Canada, of all places where they're rebuilding the coal plants. We need more coal. It's cheap. It's the coal. American coal is very clean. And I would point out it's affordable. It will lower our electricity rates, and we have one of the highest. We should be lowering those rates.
Well, there are great paying jobs associated with coal.
Yes, mining, and I'd say even in the plants, I think that should be really considered. And I would just point out
a lot of those jobs pay over $100,000 a year.
And that's excellent. And not only that, I was going to point out with Cassidy and Graham, some people might be thinking, oh, are these blue state or swing state Republican senators? No, these are in safe red states, deep red ones, South Carolina and Louisiana.
Well, this article was from pipelineonline.ca. It says, for the last decade, the federal government has pushed Saskatchewan to build more wind and solar powered generation. But Alberta, over the past 3 years, has doubled down both its wind and solar capacity. This is from Steve Malloy again. Subsidizing oil companies to capture CO2 is 100% fraud and corruption. The American Petroleum Institute should be ashamed to steal from already bankrupt taxpayers. Jim Banks, Todd Young, why is that language even being considered? Government should not be picking winners and losers. Government should not be subsidizing these giant oil corporations. And the CO2 capture thing is a total fraud.
It's a scam.
Complete scam. And I
Well,
also,
and it's all based on the fact, there's global warming. Yeah, it's hot today, but it's summer.
yeah,
It's going to be hot.
it's gonna be hot.
And listen,
that's
did you know that the Alps were ice-free just 6,000 years ago? That's before any coal plants. This is from Steve Malloy. Before SUVs, before cheeseburgers, before cows were passing gas.
Oh,
It was warmer then, just 6,000 years ago. That is not even a blink of an eye.
yeah. That's
And
centuries.
And instead, all these Indiana politicians and federal politicians are running around. They truly believe in...
The sky is falling. The sky is falling.
Like
It's
Chicken Little.
They believe in this New Deal scam because that's how they get their campaign donations. They're, these solar companies that install them, guess who they're donating to?
Okay, they get the politicians in particular.
Yep.
And then you, the taxpayer, are paying for it.
Yeah, and I would also point out when it comes to subsidize, you mentioned subsidies, John. Let's remember the Obama. This happened, and one of them was the Solyndra during the Obama administration. They were that solar company. They got subsidized, went belly up, and eventually they were actually raided by the feds.
But we had to pay for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And who was on the hook for it? Us.
Us, the taxpayer,
And
and our kids.
And that's what the Indiana GOP is doing every time they vote for this.
In fact, someone once joked saying not only were they picking the winners and losers, they were picking the losers.
That's what career politicians do, because generally in life, you're not a career politician if you were successful in the private sector.
Exactly.
I was, for 40 years working in my family's business before I ever even dreamed of getting into politics. Never thought I would. But I thought, well, with my life of experience, I would have exactly what we need in the state of Indiana to have real fiscal conservatism. Unfortunately, in the 9th Congressional District, our 9th Congressional District Chairman, Jamie Knoll, who's now sitting in jail,
The disgraced Clark County Sheriff.
Yep.
disgraced, jailed, and convicted embezzler of over $3 million, who was the boss of the Jackson County chairman that kept me off the ballot.
Which is a disgrace. What happened?
Well,
that is a disgrace, and that is.
And that happens all across the state of Indiana. They don't want people who have worked their whole lives being successful. My family, we feed over 20 million people every day. That's not who they want in politics. They want people who are in on the grift.
They only pick the insiders, and they keep we the people out of it.
Because, it's the people like Jamie Knoll who are in it for the embezzlement and just taking money from the taxpayers. Folks, when we come back, we will get right back into this and more on Rust on the Radio. Stay tuned. Welcome back, folks. This is John Rust on Rust on the Radio on Freedom 95, 950 AM and 95.9 FM, broadcasting all across central Indiana. So, breaking news. This is from Right Angle News Network. Senator Lisa Murkowski says she is open to leaving the GOP, becoming an independent, and voting alongside Democrats if they manage to pick up 3 seats.
Wow.
Wow, it's very interesting to think of.
Well, I say good. Go. Leave the party. Take Jim Banks and Todd Young and Lindsey Grahamnesty with you. Anyone that votes for debt increases should not be in the Republican Party. You're not a conservative.
She's from Alaska, a safe red state. There's no excuse for that. The only reason she's there, I would just point out.
Ranked choice voting, which
Yeah.
is what screwed us in New York City.
Not just ranked choice voting. Her father, Frank Murkowski, held that seat before her. When he was elected governor of Alaska, he appointed her, and he was criticized for nepotism. He was so unpopular for that Sarah Palin beat him in the next primary in
Yes.
2006. Hence why she was governor.
Well, that's why I don't believe in political dynasties. You got to, I think politicians should be people that have proven themselves in the private sector and then come in and serve a term or two and then get out. The problem is career politicians, they just care about their career. No way.
And I would say, to give Sarah Palin credit, she served a term, and afterwards she was, I don't think she ran for Congress afterwards, didn't win, but she's been active supporting people.
Well, if Lisa Murkowski is out there saying that if the balance swings back now, today the Republicans should kick her off of any committees. Today.
Yeah.
Today.
Because she's announced, for all practical purposes, she's out. So let her out.
Where's John
It's better
Ford
to
on
get
this?
her gone now than to try to keep funding her. And that's what, unfortunately, remember Mitch McConnell, was sending her millions of dollars when she had a conservative try to take her on in the primary.
Yeah.
Mitch McConnell, who backed Jim Banks and Todd Young,
and Tom Tillis,
was the one pushing for Lisa Murkowski. We've got to get rid of these career politicians, folks. They're just killing our debt.
They absolutely are. And with her, not just with the ranked choice voting, but here's the thing. She's, again, Alaskans are not happy with her. They want her out. So.
Well, she votes for all this debt like Jim Banks and Todd Young.
Yeah.
Well, and there's consequences. And the consequences to having people like Jim Banks and Lisa Murkowski and Elizabeth Warren, who is Jim Banks' next best buddy now, apparently.
Yeah, they worked on a lot of things together.
Yeah.
I've read the press releases, too.
Well, they want massive government debt. Both of them do. Both Elizabeth Warren and Jim Banks. And Todd Young. And Lisa Murkowski. And Lindsey Grahamnesty. You know, these people are peas in a pod.
And with Elizabeth Warren, you expect that because it's Massachusetts. So you would that's normally what you expect.
You know, the sad part is all this government debt means inflation. There is no other way around it. They are just devaluing the dollar to pay for this government debt. And so that means your auto insurance rates in the U.S. have increased over 84% in the last 5 years. That is the biggest 5-year spike on record. Just from May of 2025 to May of 2024, it is exploding, and that is directly because of the massive government debt that so few people are talking about. I can't believe that. I think that should be front and center if you're a Republican, how you vote on government debt.
Exactly, that should be the top priority.
Well, and Donald J. Trump said that in his tweet. Anyone that votes for debt should not be in the Republican Party, and they should be primaried. Well, whatever career politicians touch is destroyed. Listen to this, folks. The average U.S. family health insurance premium in the year 2000 was $6,000 a year. Guess what it is today? It's over $26,000. It's went up over $20,000 per year per U.S. family. And this was for 2024 records. 2025 is going to be much, much higher.
It's going to be through the roof.
That is a 342% increase since 1999. That's over 6.1% a year. That's the true inflation rate right there, that the government is hiding because they keep changing the official basket of goods that is shown for what inflation really is. So they will say, well, here's a dozen eggs, here's a pound of ribeye steak, here's a gallon of milk, here's what your car insurance is. The government keeps changing what's in that basket of goods to keep it as low as possible. And so they go out and shop for items that haven't went up that much and say, well, we're going to weight that item more in what the inflation index this year than what it was last year. Because unfortunately, the inflation index, the basket of goods that is made up to show what that is, changes every year. And that's because the government's picking they're going to say, well, okay, green beans are cheaper this year, so we're going to put that in. That's exactly what happens. So related to this, the average Social Security recipient gets $1,200 a month after working 50 plus years. The average illegal refugee gets $3,874 a month after being in America for 50 minutes. That should infuriate everyone. That's from Mila Joy on Twitter. Well, Jim Banks was chairman of the Republican
study committee. That's a leadership position.
And they came out and said, we want to raise the retirement age. No, you can't do that. If you worked all your life, you can't pull the rug out from under people and say, no, you got to work more so that we can keep paying these illegals to get SNAP benefits and whatever, and Medicaid and Medicare they're getting. But you have to work and pay for it. And in Indiana, you have to pay not only the fourth highest gas tax in the country to go to work to pay the taxes for these illegals. You also now will have to pay a toll. The Indiana GOP, they are considering tolling every single mile of interstate in Indiana.
Which are already paid for.
Which were already paid for by the gas tax.
Exactly.
This is from Matt Vanswell. The 2025 GOP are genuinely the most worthless majority that Congress has ever seen. The Senate hasn't passed any of the DOGE cuts sent to them by the House, nor have they passed the SAVE Act. What the F is the Senate GOP actually doing?
They're sitting down hoping that the Democrats will get the majority. That's what they're doing.
Well, from Gunther Eagleman on Twitter, what kind of Congress sends $40 to $87 million per week of taxpayer money to the Taliban? Why are we subsidizing that?
So we're sending money to the Taliban government in Afghanistan. That's lovely.
Right.
A terrorist regime.
Back on Elon Musk, no one seems to be getting arrested over the corruption that Elon uncovered. Why not? What's going on there? Why was he run out of town?
Because he got too close.
He got too close, and he was identifying very much the USAID stuff that affects a lot of spouses of certain congressional members. So,
yeah. And not only that, there's already some indictments on a big USAID, big fraud bribery scheme, which is very telling.
Right. So, who can tell a Democrat this is from Hoosier for Liberty on Twitter. I like this a lot. Who can tell a Democrat from a Republican in Indiana? They all appear to be Democrats to this Hoosier paying 3 times the property tax I did 10 years ago on the same property.
Yeah.
We live in a red state. We elect quote-unquote Republicans to statewide offices, and all we get are these massive tax increases, the 4th highest gasoline tax in the country, toll roads coming to every square mile of interstate highways in the state of Indiana.
And it's going to impact local roads, too.
Indiana's fast becoming the new Illinois.
It is.
And California. California is copying what Indiana is doing on the Economic Development Corporation.
And I would also point out that when you look at that, what you just talked about, that's going to hurt the local roads. Now, I drive local roads all the time. I don't really drive the interstate at all. But it's going to affect, if you're just a local driver, you better get ready, because these toll roads are going to affect you in the worst way imaginable, because you're going to be sitting in traffic because nobody's going to want to take those toll roads. And honestly, who can blame them?
Right. So, folks, when we come back, we're going to get right back into the toll thing, because it is exploding thanks to the show, Raising the Curtain and Shine the Flashlight. There's big news on that. So we'll be right back. This is John Rust on the Radio. Welcome back to Rust on the Radio. This is John Rust on the John Rust Show, broadcasting on Freedom 95. Also available on podcasts on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, and iHeartRadio. So we were just talking about tolls in the last segment, and I want to dig into this more. That was just announced, toll rate changes, and when politicians say changes, that means increase, coming to bridges connecting Indiana to Louisville.
That's my question.
Well, here's what the new toll rates between Louisville and southern Indiana will be. Drivers who frequent the bridges connecting Louisville and southern Indiana will see yet another toll increase on July 1st. Riverlink, which runs the tolls, said the rates are determined by a bi-state resolution established in 2013. Guess who controlled Indiana in 2013? The Republicans.
Yeah.
Every office. The rates will increase to $2.68 for passenger cars and $16.01 for trucks. That's if you have an Easy Pass. If you don't have an Easy Pass, and most people don't, they send you an invoice in the mail.
I have that happen every time I've gone through
right. And it always comes late for some reason. And then by the time you pay it, you owe a late fee.
That's your government in action, ladies and gentlemen.
And so you spend more time writing checks for the late fees, and it is so much that many people in southern Indiana, New Albany, and Clarksville, they just skip the toll bridge and they drive across the last free remaining bridge across Indiana. Well, and that's what's going to happen all across the state of Indiana. They're going to just destroy the interstate system and make people drive local roads to avoid these massive tolls that are coming. But so what happened was, and this is really hilarious. I put up a billboard right next to the Kennedy Bridge in Louisville, and it says property tax and tolls are theft. and I was, pushing the John Rush show down there.
There you go.
There you go.
Almost just days after that billboard went up, Secretary of State Diego Morales and Lieutenant Governor Micah Beckwith suddenly decided they're against toll roads now too. So congratulations. Welcome to the party. Glad you're listening. I'm glad the billboard is having an effect, because we need to have common sense in Indiana. We don't need more tolls. We don't need higher tolls. What happened under DeSantis is this is what should be, in theory, what should be happening here. Once the amount of money collected by the toll is taken in, they do away with it and take the toll booth out.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen, unfortunately, in the state of Indiana. That's what exactly should be happening. This is from Ken Colbert. Indiana becomes the first state to permit tolling on all interstates. There is a proliferation of electric cars that has reduced revenue from gas taxes that must supplement the revenues coming in to maintain existing roads. And he says, I call bull loney. I use the polite term there.
And may I just point out, look, I know I've seen electric cars on the road here and there, but I hardly see them at all. There's barely anybody I think of.
Well, to say the gas tax is collecting less revenue is absolutely false. It's actually increased. It's increased over 20% over the last 5 years. Gasoline tax has increased massively in the state of Indiana. And all the politicians are saying, oh, it's not enough. We need more money. And they're not spending that money on bridges or on roads. They're spending on special projects, that are picked and chosen by the IEDC, for instance. Why should your money be spent on tolls for the Indiana Economic Development Corporation to go out and pick who gets that money?
Not only that, I would just point out much of the IEDC, they don't really, I think they've stayed out of they seems like they only focus on the donut counties. That seems to be the only place they like to hang around.
Well, this, folks, Indiana is in danger, and it's, unfortunately, this is from the Reason Foundation. Indiana is the first state in the country to approve tolling for all interstates. We're the first in the country doing this.
That's Indiana, not a good thing to be.
Indiana is a red state. Even California doesn't do that, or Illinois, or Massachusetts.
Massachusetts, or Connecticut. I don't know if Connecticut does, but
it's all about the grift. It's all about who these tolling companies are paying off, either behind the scenes
or out in the open.
Or out in the open through campaign donations. Well, remember what I said about the chocolate cake, folks. We have a lot of career politicians that are not from the real world. They are really just 5 and 6 year old babes in the woods, brought into a room with a giant chocolate cake and tubs of chocolate ice cream and whipped cream. No utensils, no napkins. And these kids, these career politicians, see that chocolate cake and the whipped cream and the chocolate ice cream, and they just make pigs of themselves. They are covered from tip to toe in chocolate. Substitute chocolate for taxes. That is the Indiana GOP. That is the Indiana GOP wanting to toll and tax through the fourth highest gasoline tax in the country, and then say, oh, that's not enough. We have to toll you as well. We have to get rid of these career politicians, these kids who don't know how to behave. We have to get real fiscal conservatism back to the state of Indiana. And it's gone. And you know why. So here's the estimate. Listen to this. This is important. Indiana will rake, this is from the Ken Colbert, Indiana will rake in nearly $40 billion, with a B, billion dollars in 2 years with these tolls.
That's a lot of money there.
That is more than double the Indiana state budget today. What on earth are they doing? Why? Well, of course, it's all about the grift. It's about the Jamie Knowles. It's more money for them to steal. It's more money for them to collect from political donations from the people administering these tolls, like Riverlink. Who are they donating to, and who owns Riverlink?
Exactly.
Yeah. And I would also just point out that Jamie Knoll was once proclaimed to be on, quote, Team Banks in that Instagram post.
Oh, he still is. He's still on their website.
Instagram post is still there.
It's still there. It hasn't been taken down.
Oh, they're very proud of their grift. They're very proud of their theft.
Well, I appreciate the honesty from them on that.
Well, they're honest thieves.
Yeah. That's a good description.
Thieves, thick as thieves. Good grief.
It's like George Carlin said, it's one big club and we're not in it.
They're going more and more to jail. Look what happened in Scott County with the sheriff there, who also endorsed Jim Banks, who is now facing charges as well. That just shows you the state of the GOP today in Indiana, where all they care about is raising more tax revenue for them to spend and to, slap all over their face like the chocolate cake, just to keep going and going and going. We need real fiscal conservatives. So, folks, I do want to say this. This is very important. We'll be talking about this more next year during primary season. Absolutely vote in the primary election. Even though there is often no choice, it is extremely important that you vote in the primary. Vote against every incumbent.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I second that. Vote against it. Vote against them, and it's time
But
to
vote
clean house.
because we have to get real conservatives back to the state of Indiana.
And make sure you know that we got a convention coming up too. Diego Morales is up for re-election in that convention. we need to make sure we get delegates who are great. Know who your delegates are, and get involved in that too. If you can run for a delegate, if you qualify, do it.
Well, they're looking at more and more ways to keep people like me from running for political office. So I want to tell other people out there who have worked all their lives and are interested in running for political office, make sure you're voting in the primaries, because they will use any reason they can to throw you off, because they want to protect the grift for themselves. They don't want any outsiders in, period.
They only want the insiders.
So, folks, we're out of time. Thank you so much for listening. I want to close with my father's favorite Bible verse. Psalm 118, verse 24. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad. Folks, I'll see you all again next week on the radio. Have a great weekend.